He froze mid-step, blood on the pavement, a trembling hand reaching for him. Then she whispered one word that shattered his empire, son. In that alley, Hector Flores had seconds to choose: protect his throne or save the woman who gave him life. And whatever he chose would set the city on fire. If this story pulled you in, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss what's coming next. I've got another unforgettable story dropping tomorrow. And while you're here, jump into the comments and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing our community from all around the world. Alright, let's get back into it. A deserted alley. Late evening, the kind of place where the street lamps flicker like dying stars, and the rain has just stopped, leaving everything slick and silent. The kind of place where bodies are dumped and questions are never asked. The kind of place Hector Flores knew too well. His black Audi A8 sat idling at the alley's entrance, engine purring like a satisfied predator. The taillights cast red shadows across the wet pavement, painting everything in blood tones. Steam rose from the manholes. Graffiti covered the brick walls, territorial marks, warnings, names of the forgotten. Hector stepped out of the car, his Italian leather shoes touching down on cracked asphalt. 6'1", broad-shouldered, his black suit fit perfectly, tailored to hide the gun at his hip and the scars beneath the silk shirt, dark hair slicked back, strong jaw set in permanent calculation, the kind of face that made grown men look away. His driver remained behind the wheel, hands on the steering wheel, eyes straight ahead. That's how it worked. Hector handled his business alone. Always had. This meeting was supposed to be quick. A territorial dispute. Some young crew moving product on his blocks without permission. Usually these conversations ended one of two ways: compliance or disappearance. Hector preferred compliance. Less cleanup. He walked deeper into the alley, footsteps echoing off the narrow walls. The flickering street lamp overhead cast his shadow long and distorted, stretching toward the darkness ahead. His hand rested casually near his jacket, fingers close to the weapon he'd carried for 23 years. 23 years of building. 23 years of controlling every corner, every deal, every breath taken on his streets. 23 years of being untouchable. Then he saw her. At first, it was just a shape, a heap of clothes against the brick wall about 30 feet ahead. Hector had seen this before: homeless people, addicts, sometimes bodies left as messages. The city had a way of discarding people in places like this. He almost kept walking. Almost. But something made him look closer. Maybe it was the way the hand moved, weak, trembling, reaching toward nothing. Maybe it was the gray hair catching the streetlight. Maybe it was instinct. Hector's stride slowed. The shape became a person. An elderly woman, slumped against the graffiti-stained wall like a broken doll. One shoe missing. Clothes torn. Gray hair matted dark with something wet. Blood. Hector's hand moved from his gun to his side, hanging useless. His feet carried him forward, but his mind was screaming at him to stop, to turn around, to call someone else. But he couldn't stop. 20 feet away now. He could see her face. Bruised, swollen, cuts across her cheek and temple. Her hand lifted again, fingers trembling, reaching for something, someone, reaching for help that wouldn't come. 10 feet away. Hector's heart, the heart that had been silent through 100 violent acts, began to pound. His throat tightened. His hands, steady through shootouts and executions, began to shake. Because he knew that face. 5 feet away, he could hear her breathing, now shallow, ragged, the sound of someone drowning on dry land. He could see the way her chest rose and fell, each breath a battle. Could see the finger-shaped bruises around her throat. Controlled, deliberate, professional. This wasn't random violence. This was a message. 3 feet away. Hector dropped to his knees, the expensive fabric of his suit pants soaking through on the wet pavement. His shadow fell across her face, and her eyes, clouded with pain, struggled to focus. Her lips moved. Hijo. The word came out broken. A whisper that cut through 20 years of silence, 15 years of distance. A lifetime of choices Hector had convinced himself were right. Son. Hector Flores, the man who'd ordered deaths without flinching, who'd built an empire on the bones of his enemies, who'd never shown weakness, never hesitated, never broke, froze completely. His mother, Catherine Flores, the woman who'd raised him alone after his father disappeared. The woman who'd worked herself to exhaustion to keep him fed and clothed. The woman whose hands had been rough from cleaning offices at night and serving food during the day. The woman who'd kissed his forehead and told him he was destined for better things. The woman he'd pushed away 15 years ago and never looked back. She was lying injured on his street, in his alley, in his territory, dying. Mom. The word felt foreign in his mouth. When was the last time he'd said it? 10 years? 15? Her hand found his jacket, fingers clutching weakly at the expensive fabric. Her eyes focused on his face, and something flickered there, not fear, not anger, relief. Joe. They were watching. Her voice faded, then came back. I had to find you. Hector's hands hovered over her, unsure where to touch, where it was safe, what was broken. His mind, the mind that calculated odds and planned executions, went completely blank. Behind him, the car door opened. His driver's voice, cautious. Boss? Hector didn't answer. Couldn't answer. The most powerful man in the city knelt in a dirty alley, holding his mother's hand. And for the first time in 20 years, Hector Flores had absolutely no idea what to do next. The last time Hector had held his mother's hand, he was 7 years old. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late summer, and they were walking home from the corner store, where Catherine had just bought him a candy bar with the last dollar in her purse. She'd smiled down at him, her hand warm and calloused around his small fingers, and told him that as long as they had each other, they'd be okay. He'd believed her then. He'd believed her for years. But belief doesn't pay rent. Belief doesn't put food on the table. And belief certainly doesn't protect you from the men who come knocking when you owe money you don't have. Catherine Flores had been 22 when Hector was born. Too young, too poor, too alone. His father, a man whose name she rarely spoke, had disappeared before Hector took his first breath. No note, no explanation, just gone, leaving behind a pregnant woman in a one-bedroom apartment in the worst part of the city. She could have given him up. Should have. Probably. Everyone told her so. But Catherine had looked at her newborn son, counted his tiny fingers, kissed his forehead, and decided that some things were worth fighting for. So she fought. 3 jobs, sometimes 4, cleaning offices at night while Hector slept in a playpen in the janitor's closet, serving tables during the day while her neighbor watched him for $5 she couldn't afford, doing laundry, ironing shirts, anything that would keep them fed and housed. Hector remembered those years in fragments, the sound of his mother's keys in the door at 2 a.m., the smell of industrial cleaner on her clothes, the way she'd collapse on their second-hand couch, still in her uniform, too tired to even take off her shoes. But she always had energy for him, always had a smile when he showed her his drawings, always had time to help with homework at the kitchen table, always kissed his forehead before bed and whispered the same words, "You're going to do great things, Mijo. I know it." She believed in him when no one else did. When he was 8, Hector started noticing things. The way his mother's hands shook when bills arrived, the way she'd skip meals and claim she wasn't hungry, the way she'd cry softly in the bathroom, thinking he couldn't hear. When he was 10, he started stealing. Small things at first. A candy bar here, a sandwich there, anything to take pressure off his mother. He'd bring food home, claim a friend's parent had given it to him. Catherine would look at him with those knowing eyes. She wasn't stupid, but she was too exhausted to fight. When he was 12, he started running errands for the older boys in the neighborhood, delivering packages, standing lookout, small jobs that paid enough to slip $20 under his mother's pillow while she slept. She knew. Of course she knew. But what could she do? Work a 4th job? She was already destroying herself. So she made him swear on her life that he'd be careful, that he'd stay in school, that this was temporary. He'd promised. He'd lied. By 14, Hector was in deep, not just running errands anymore, but part of the operation. The older boys had become his family. The streets had become his school. And the money was more than his mother made in a month. Catherine watched her son transform. Watched him come home later and later. Watched his eyes grow harder. Watched him start carrying himself like someone who'd seen things no child should see. She begged him to stop. He told her he was doing it for her. For me. She'd grabbed his face, tears streaming. "Hijo, I don't want this for you. I don't want blood money. I don't want you becoming them." "Then what do you want?" Hector had shouted back. 17 and angry and tired of being poor. "You want to keep working yourself to death? You want us to keep living like this? I want my son," she'd screamed. "Not this. Not you turning into—" She hadn't finished. Couldn't finish. Because they both knew what he was becoming. The first time Hector pulled a trigger, he was 18. A rival crew member. Self-defense, technically, but murder all the same. He'd come home shaking, blood on his shirt, and found his mother waiting at the kitchen table. She didn't ask what happened. She just looked at him with eyes full of grief and pulled him into her arms like he was 7 years old again. "I'm losing you," she'd whispered against his hair. I'm watching you disappear. I'm right here, Ma. No, she'd said, pulling back to look at him. You're not. Not anymore. She was right. Over the next 5 years, Hector rose through the ranks, ruthless, efficient, willing to do what others wouldn't. By 23, he was running his own crew. By 25, he'd eliminated his competition. By 26, he controlled a third of the city. And Catherine watched it all from the same small apartment, growing older and more heartbroken with each passing year. She'd stopped begging him to leave, stopped crying, stopped asking questions about the blood on his clothes or the bruises on his knuckles. She just loved him, quietly, desperately. But love has limits. The breaking point came on a Thursday night. Hector, 26 years old, showed up at her apartment at 3 a.m. with 3 bullet holes in his car and enemies who knew where his mother lived. He'd found Catherine sitting in the dark, rosary beads in her hands, waiting. They're coming for you, she'd said softly. Aren't they? He couldn't lie to her. Not about this. I'm moving you, he'd announced. Tomorrow, new apartment, across town, somewhere safe. Safe? She'd laughed, bitter and broken. There's no safe, Hector. Not in your world. There is if you're away from me. The words had hung between them like a death sentence. So that's it? Catherine had stood, old before her time at 48. You're just leaving me? I'm protecting you. You're abandoning me. Ma, don't. She'd held up her hand. Don't call me that while you're doing this. He'd moved her anyway, set her up in a modest apartment 20 miles away, paid her rent through a lawyer, sent money every month through an intermediary, and stopped visiting, stopped calling, stopped being her son. He told himself it was for her safety. That distance meant protection. That loving someone meant letting them go. 15 years of that lie. 15 years of convincing himself he was doing the right thing. Until tonight. Until he found her bleeding in his alley, whispering his name, reaching for the son she'd never stopped loving. Hector looked down at his mother's broken face, at the finger-shaped bruises on her throat, at the way her hand still clutched his jacket like she was afraid he'd disappear again. And for the first time in 15 years, Hector Flores did something he thought he'd forgotten how to do. He broke. Boss! The driver's voice came again, more urgent this time. Boss, we need to move. Hector didn't respond. Couldn't respond. His entire world had collapsed into this moment. His mother's labored breathing, the blood soaking through her clothes, the cold pavement beneath his knees. Catherine's eyes fluttered, struggling to stay focused on his face. Her lips moved again, forming words that barely had sound. I'm sorry. I had to. Find you. Shh. Ma. Don't talk. Just... Hector's voice cracked. When was the last time his voice had cracked? Just stay with me. He forced himself to assess the damage, the way he'd been trained to assess everything clinically, methodically. But this wasn't some soldier who'd taken a bullet. This wasn't business. This was his mother. The cuts on her face were deep but not fatal. Defensive wounds on her forearms she'd tried to fight back. The bruising around her throat made his stomach turn. Someone had choked her, released, then struck her. The pattern was deliberate, professional. This was torture, not murder. Not yet. His hands hovered over her body, afraid to touch, afraid of what else he might find. Her left side, the way she winced when she breathed broken ribs. Probably. The angle of her ankle twisted, maybe fractured. How long have you been here? Hector asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Hours, I think. They left me, they said. She coughed, and blood flecked her lips. They said to give you a message. Ice flooded Hector's veins. What message? That no one is safe. Her hand tightened on his jacket. That they know where to hurt you. Behind him, footsteps. His driver had gotten out of the car, standing at a respectful distance but clearly agitated. Boss, I don't mean to rush, but we're exposed here. If this is a setup, it's not a setup. Hector's words came out sharp, definitive. How do you know? Because if they'd wanted to kill him, they would have. This wasn't an ambush. This was something worse. This was a demonstration. Hector's mind raced through the possibilities. Who would dare? Who would be stupid enough, bold enough, suicidal enough to touch his mother? Not his rivals. They feared him too much. Not the Russians. They had an understanding. Not the Colombians. They needed him. Which left only one possibility. One that made his blood run cold and his hands curl into fists. Someone inside. Someone close enough to know about Catherine. Close enough to know where she lived. Close enough to arrange this without raising alarms. A betrayal. Boss? The driver stepped closer. What do you want me to do? Hector looked down at his mother. At the woman who'd given him everything. The woman he'd pushed away for 15 years because he'd convinced himself that distance meant safety. He'd been wrong. The realization hit him like a physical blow. All his power, all his control, all his carefully constructed walls, they'd meant nothing. His enemies had still found her, had still hurt her, and they'd done it on his streets, in his territory, in his world. His protection had been an illusion. We need a hospital, Hector said finally. The driver's face went pale. Boss, you know what that means. Questions, police, records. If anyone traces this back, I know what it means. Your competitors will see it as weakness. Your own men will question. I said I know. Hector's voice was steel. He looked up at the driver, and something in his expression made the man take a step back. Get the car ready. Boss, think about this. There are other ways. We have doctors who don't ask questions. We can move her somewhere private, somewhere secure. How long? Hector interrupted. What? How long to get a doctor to a secure location? How long to set up? How long before she gets real medical care? The driver hesitated. An hour, maybe 2. Hector looked back at his mother. At the blood. At the way each breath seemed harder than the last. At the paleness of her skin. She didn't have 2 hours. Maybe didn't even have one. The hospital, Hector repeated. Now. He slid his arms beneath Catherine, one under her shoulders, one under her knees. She whimpered, a sound that cut through him like a knife. I know, Ma. I know it hurts. But I've got you. As he lifted her, his mother's head lolled against his chest. Her blood soaked into his suit, warm and wet. The expensive fabric darkened, ruined. He didn't care. He stood, his mother's weight nothing in his arms. She'd been heavier when he was 7, and she'd carry him to bed after he'd fallen asleep watching TV. Now she felt fragile, breakable, old. When had she gotten so old? The driver rushed ahead, opening the back door of the Audi. Street Catherine's is closest. 8 minutes if I push it. Street Catherine's, named after a saint. His mother had wanted to name him after a saint too, had almost named him Gabriel. But his father, in one of his few contributions to Hector's life, had insisted on Hector. Warrior, defender. Some defender he'd turned out to be. Hector slid into the back seat, cradling his mother against him. Her head rested in the crook of his arm, her breathing shallow and wet. Blood dripped onto the leather seats. The driver got behind the wheel, engine roaring to life. Boss, I have to say this. The moment we pull up to that hospital, everything changes. People will know. Your enemies will know. Your own people will know you chose. They'll know I chose my mother. Hector's voice was quiet but absolute. Let them know. The car lurched forward, tires squealing on wet pavement. Catherine's eyes opened slightly, finding his face in the dim light. Hijo, I'm here, Ma. I'm right here. I knew, she coughed, wincing. I knew you'd come. For me. The words shattered something inside him. Because she was right. After 15 years of absence, 15 years of distance, 15 years of convincing himself he was protecting her by staying away when it mattered, he'd come. But he'd come too late. I'm sorry, Hector whispered, the words foreign on his tongue. How many years since he'd apologized to anyone? Ma, I'm so sorry. For everything. For leaving. For... Shh. Her hand found his face, fingers trembling against his cheek. You're here. Now. That's what matters. The city blurred past the windows. Streetlights. Storefronts. People who had no idea that in the back of that speeding black Audi, the most powerful man in the city was holding his dying mother and praying to a god he'd stopped believing in years ago. Stay with me, Hector murmured, repeating it like a mantra. Just stay with me, Ma. Please. Catherine's hand slipped from his face. Her eyes closed, and Hector Flores, who'd faced down armed enemies without flinching, who'd built an empire on fear, who'd never shown weakness, felt tears burn down his face for the first time in 20 years. The fluorescent lights of Street Catherine's emergency room were too bright, too sterile, too far from the world Hector knew. He stood in the hallway outside the trauma bay, suit still soaked with his mother's blood, hands shaking with adrenaline he couldn't burn off. Nurses rushed past him. Doctors shouted medical terms he didn't understand. Machines beeped and whirred behind closed doors. And Hector Flores, a man who controlled half the city, could do nothing but wait. His driver stood nearby, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in low, urgent tones. Damage control. The word was already spreading through the organization. The boss had taken someone to the hospital. The boss was exposed. The boss had shown weakness. Let them talk. Hector's mind was racing, cycling through the same questions on repeat. Who did this? Who was bold enough? Who was stupid enough? The trauma bay doors swung open, and a doctor emerged, young, exhausted, blood on her scrubs. She spotted Hector immediately, her eyes flicking to the blood on his suit before meeting his gaze. Are you family? I'm her son. The doctor's expression softened slightly. She's stable. For now. 3 broken ribs, fractured ankle, severe contusions, possible internal bleeding we're monitoring. The head trauma is our biggest concern. We're running a CT scan to check for brain hemorrhaging. Hector's jaw tightened. Will she make it? The next 24 hours are critical. If there's no intracranial bleeding and we can manage the internal injuries. The doctor paused, choosing her words carefully. She's strong, but she's also been through significant trauma. Her body has limits. Can I see her? Not yet. We need to. The doctor's pager beeped. She glanced down, her expression shifting. I need to go. Someone will update you as soon as we know more. She disappeared back through the doors, leaving Hector alone with his thoughts and his driver. Boss. The driver approached cautiously. Ricky's asking questions. So is Tommy. They want to know what's happening. What should I tell them? Tell them nothing. Boss. I said nothing. Hector turned, his eyes cold and hard. No one talks about this. No one asks questions. Anyone who does answers to me personally. Understood? The driver nodded quickly. Understood. Hector walked to the window at the end of the hallway, looking out over the city. His city. The empire he'd built. Brick by bloody brick. Somewhere out there, someone was celebrating. Someone thought they'd won. They hadn't won. They'd just made the worst mistake of their life. His phone buzzed. A text from Leo, his underboss and right hand for the past 8 years. Heard you had an emergency. Everything okay? Hector stared at the message. Leo knew better than to text about business. They had protocols, secure lines, face-to-face meetings in controlled locations. This text was wrong. Too casual. Too convenient. Too perfectly timed. He typed back. Family situation. Handled. 3 dots appeared immediately. Leo was typing. Need anything? I can mobilize the crew. Hector's finger hovered over the screen. Every instinct he'd honed over 23 years was screaming at him. He deleted his response and typed something else. Meet me at the warehouse. 2 hours. Which warehouse? Hector's blood went cold. They had 5 warehouses, but they only ever used one for meetings. The one on 47th Street, by the docks. Leo knew that. Everyone knew that. Unless Leo was asking because he wasn't alone. Because someone was reading over his shoulder. Because this wasn't really Leo talking. Or because Leo was the one who'd ordered this. Hector didn't respond. Instead, he made another call. To Victor, his head of security. A man who'd been with him since the beginning. A man he trusted with his life. Victor answered on the first ring. Boss, I need information. Quietly. Who knew about my mother's location? A pause. Boss, that's a very short list. I know. Give me names. You, me, Leo, and the 2 guys who handle her building security. That's it. 5 people. 5 people knew where Catherine lived. The security guys, Hector said. Where are they now? I can find out. What's going on? Someone got to my mother, beat her, left her in an alley as a message. The silence on the other end was deafening. Then, Jesus Christ, is she? She's alive. Barely. Hector's voice was ice. Find those security guys. Don't approach them. Just find them and tell me where they are. Boss, if someone inside did this, I know what it means. Leo's been asking questions all night. Wanted to know where you were. Seemed nervous. Hector closed his eyes. Leo. His underboss. The man he'd promoted. The man he'd trusted with territory. With money. With lives. The man who'd told him 3 months ago that having emotional attachments was dangerous in their line of work. The man who'd asked, casually, if Hector still had family in the city. The man who'd smiled and changed the subject when Hector hadn't answered. Find the security guys, Hector repeated. And Victor? Don't tell Leo I called. Understood. Hector ended the call and stood there, staring at his phone. His driver approached again, hesitant. Boss, you okay? No. Hector turned to face him. How long have you been with me? 6 years. Boss. You ever meet Leo before he joined us? The driver frowned, thinking. No. He came recommended from the Vega crew after they got absorbed, right? Right. Hector's mind was piecing it together. Leo had come 8 years ago, after Hector had taken over the Vega territory. Came with credentials, connections, results. Came with ambition. Boss, what are you thinking? Before Hector could answer, his phone rang. Victor. Found them. Where? Bottom of the river. Both of them. Been there at least 2 days based on the condition. Hector's grip on the phone tightened. You're sure? Harbor Patrol just pulled them out an hour ago. Haven't ID'd them yet, but I recognize the tattoos. It's them. 2 days. Catherine had been attacked tonight, which meant someone had eliminated the witnesses before the attack even happened. This wasn't opportunistic. This wasn't random. This was planned. Victor, I need you to do something for me, and you can't tell anyone. Name it. I need surveillance on Leo. Everything. Where he goes, who he meets, who he calls, but he can't know. No one can know. You think I think someone inside wanted to send me a message, Hector interrupted, and there's only one person with the access and the ambition to do it. Another pause. Then, I'll handle it personally. Good. And Victor, be careful. If I'm right, he's already planning his next move. Hector ended the call and looked back toward the trauma bay doors. Behind them, his mother was fighting for her life, fighting because someone he'd trusted, someone he'd elevated, someone he'd called brother had decided she was a weakness worth exploiting. They were wrong. Catherine Flores wasn't his weakness. She was the only thing he'd ever done right. And the man who'd hurt her was about to learn that there are worse things than death in Hector Flores's world. There was betrayal, and betrayal had a price that could never be fully paid. The ICU was quiet at 4 a.m. Hector sat in a plastic chair beside his mother's bed, still wearing his blood-stained suit. He hadn't left, hadn't changed, hadn't slept. The nurses had stopped asking if he needed anything 3 hours ago. Catherine lay unconscious, tubes running from her arms, monitors beeping steadily. The bruises on her face had darkened to deep purple. Her breathing was assisted by a machine that hissed and clicked with mechanical precision. She looked small in that hospital bed, fragile, nothing like the woman who'd worked 3 jobs and raised him alone, nothing like the woman who'd stood up to landlords and bill collectors and anyone who threatened her son. Time had stolen her strength. Or maybe Hector had. His phone buzzed constantly on the table beside him. Messages from his crew, questions about business, territories that needed attention, money that needed collecting, problems that required his decision. He ignored all of it. For the first time in 15 years, the Empire could wait. A nurse entered quietly, checking Catherine's vitals, adjusting the IV drip. She glanced at Hector with a mixture of pity and concern. You should go home, she said softly. Get some rest. We'll call if anything changes. I'm staying. Sir, you've been here for hours. You're exhausted. Your mother is stable for now. I said I'm staying. His voice wasn't harsh, just final. The nurse nodded and left without another word. Hector leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and stared at his mother's face. How many times had he imagined this moment, seeing her again after all these years? In his imagination, it was always different, always controlled, always on his terms. He'd pictured showing up at her door with an envelope full of money, maybe taking her to dinner at some expensive restaurant, proving to her that he'd made it, that all the violence, all the choices, all the distance had been worth it. He'd never pictured this. Never pictured her broken and bleeding. Never pictured himself helpless. I'm sorry. Ma, he whispered, knowing she couldn't hear him. I'm so sorry. The machines beeped their steady rhythm. Outside the window, the city was waking up. Dawn breaking over buildings and streets where Hector's word was law. But here, in this hospital room, his word meant nothing. Money couldn't heal her faster. Power couldn't force her to wake up. Fear couldn't change the fact that he'd failed the one person who'd never failed him. His phone buzzed again. This time, he looked. Victor. Leo met with the Cordero brothers at 3 a.m. Left alone, seemed agitated. The Cordero brothers. Mid-level dealers who'd been pushing for more territory. Ambitious. Reckless. Exactly the type Leo would use if he was planning something. Hector typed back. Keep watching. He set the phone down and reached for his mother's hand. Her skin was cold, papery. He remembered when her hands had been strong, capable of anything. Now they felt like they might crumble at his touch. You know what the worst part is? Hector spoke quietly to the unconscious woman. I convinced myself I was protecting you, that staying away kept you safe. But all I did was make you easier to hurt. The machines continued their rhythm. I should have visited, should have called, should have been. His voice cracked. Should have been your son. He sat back, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. When was the last time he'd cried before tonight? He couldn't remember. Maybe the day Catherine had confronted him about the blood on his shirt. Maybe the day he'd moved her across town and driven away without looking back. Maybe he'd just stopped feeling things entirely. The door opened again. Not a nurse this time. A doctor, the same one from earlier. She looked more exhausted than before, but her expression was cautiously optimistic. Mr. Flores? Hector stood immediately. How is she? The CT scan came back clear. No brain hemorrhaging. The internal bleeding has stabilized. Her vitals are improving. The doctor managed a tired smile. She's a fighter. She always has been. The next 24 hours are still critical, but I'm cautiously optimistic. She's responding well to treatment. Her body is healing. Hector felt something release in his chest. Not relief, not yet, but hope. Terrifying, fragile hope. When will she wake up? Hard to say. Could be hours, could be days. We've sedated her to let her body focus on healing, but based on her responses, I believe she'll regain consciousness. The doctor paused. Mr. Flores, I need to ask. The police will want to speak with her about what happened, about who did this to her. Let them try. The doctor frowned. Sir, whoever did this will be dealt with. Hector's tone left no room for discussion. My mother won't be speaking to the police. That's not really. It is. Hector turned to face the doctor fully. My mother has been through enough. She needs to heal, not relive her trauma for a police report that won't go anywhere. You're a doctor. Her health is your concern. Let me worry about justice. The doctor studied him for a long moment, clearly weighing her options. Finally, she nodded. I'll note in her chart that she's not well enough for questioning, but eventually won't matter. The doctor left, and Hector sat back down beside his mother's bed. 30 minutes later, Catherine's fingers twitched. Hector leaned forward immediately. Ma? Her eyes moved beneath closed lids. Her lips parted slightly. The heart monitor's rhythm changed, becoming stronger. Ma, can you hear me? It's Hector. I'm here. Catherine's eyes fluttered open. Unfocused at first, struggling against the medication and the pain. Then they found him, sitting beside her bed, and something shifted in her expression. Not fear, not anger, recognition, and something that looked like peace. Hijo. Her voice was barely a whisper, rough from the breathing tube they'd removed an hour earlier. I'm here. Don't try to talk. You're safe now. You're in the hospital. You're going to be okay. Catherine's hand moved slightly, and Hector caught it, holding it gently between both of his. I knew, she whispered. I knew. You'd come. I'm sorry it took me so long. Her eyes closed briefly, then opened again. When she spoke, each word was an effort. I always knew what you were, Hector. His throat tightened. Ma, I just prayed. She paused, breathing carefully. I just prayed. You wouldn't lose yourself. Completely. The words hit him harder than any bullet ever had. I saw the news, heard the stories. Catherine's grip on his hand strengthened slightly. I always knew. My baby boy was still in there, somewhere. Tears burned down Hector's face. I don't know if he is, Ma. I don't know if there's anything left of that kid you raised. Catherine's eyes locked on his, clearer now despite the pain and medication. You're here, aren't you? She whispered. You came. For me. You didn't. Walk away. I never should have walked away in the first place. But you came back. Her hand squeezed his. That's what matters. You came back. A nurse appeared in the doorway. Mr. Flores, she needs to rest. 1 more minute, Hector said, without looking away from his mother. Catherine's eyes were already closing, exhaustion pulling her under, but before she slipped back into sleep, she whispered 3 words that shattered what was left of Hector Flores's carefully constructed armor. I forgive you. Hector sat frozen, his mother's hand in his, and realized something that terrified him more than any enemy ever had. He'd spent 15 years building an empire, but he'd just spent one night discovering what he'd lost to build it. And for the first time in his life, Hector Flores wasn't sure the trade had been worth it. The sun rose over a city that didn't know it was about to change. Hector stood at the hospital window, watching dawn paint the skyline gold and red. Behind him, his mother slept peacefully for the first time in hours, her breathing steady, her vitals stable. He'd been awake for 36 hours straight. His suit was ruined. His hands were still stained with dried blood. His empire was probably fracturing without his presence. He didn't care. His phone had been vibrating non-stop. 15 missed calls from Leo. 23 texts from various crew members. 6 voicemails from territory managers demanding decisions on collections, disputes, and deals. Hector had responded to exactly none of them. Instead, at 6 a.m., he made one call. Victor. Boss, how is she? Stable. Awake. She's going to make it. He heard Victor exhale with relief. Thank God. What do you need? I need you to send a message to everyone. Every crew leader, every soldier, every corner boy who works for us. What message? Everything stops. Silence on the other end. Then, boss, I don't understand. Effective immediately. All operations are suspended. No collections, no shipments, no deals, no hits. Everything stops. For how long? Until I say otherwise. Boss, Victor's voice was careful. That's going to cause problems. Big problems. People are going to ask questions. Our competitors are going to see it as weakness. Leo's already been. I don't care what Leo's been doing. I don't care what our competitors think. And if anyone has a problem with my orders, they can bring it to me personally. Another pause. You're sure about this? Hector looked back at his mother's sleeping form. At the machines keeping her alive. At the bruises that marked her face like a map of his failures. I've never been more sure of anything. All right, I'll spread the word. But boss, people are going to push back. Some might even. Then they'll learn what happens when they push back against me. He ended the call and sat back down beside Catherine's bed. By noon, the word had spread through the organization like wildfire. Hector Flores had shut everything down. No one knew why. No one understood. And that made it more terrifying than any act of violence ever could. In a cramped apartment in the South Side, 3 crew leaders sat around a table, staring at their phones in disbelief. This doesn't make sense, one of them said. We've got shipments coming in tonight, buyers waiting. What are we supposed to tell them? You heard the order, another replied. Everything stops. But why? What happened? No one had an answer. In a warehouse by the docks, 2 soldiers were supposed to be collecting on a debt. Instead, they sat in their car, engine idling, unsure what to do. Victor said no collections. The driver said, that guy owes us 15 grand. You want to just let that slide? I want to keep my head attached to my shoulders. If Hector said stop, we stop. They drove away, leaving the debtor confused and grateful and terrified of what it meant. In an upscale restaurant downtown, Leo sat across from a potential business partner, trying to close a deal on new territory. His phone had been exploding with messages all morning. So we have an agreement? The partner asked, reaching for a handshake. Leo's phone buzzed again. Another message from a crew leader. Boss, what's going on? Why the shutdown? I need to make a call, Leo said, standing abruptly. Give me 5 minutes. He stepped outside and dialed Hector's number for the 16th time. It went straight to voicemail. Leo's jaw clenched. He dialed Victor instead. What the hell is happening? Leo demanded when Victor answered. Boss's orders. Everything shuts down until further notice. Why? He didn't say. Where is he? He didn't say that either. Victor, I'm his underboss. I need to know what's going on. If there's a threat, if something's happened, if the boss wanted you to know, he would have told you. The line went dead. Leo stood on the sidewalk, fury and fear warring in his chest. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Hector was supposed to be predictable, controlled, focused on the empire above all else. A man who shut down his entire operation over a personal matter wasn't predictable. He was dangerous. By evening, the streets had gone eerily quiet. Corners that usually had lookouts stood empty. Dealers who worked their regular spots had vanished. Collections that happened like clockwork didn't happen at all. The city's criminal ecosystem, finely balanced and brutally efficient, had simply stopped. Hector's competitors noticed immediately. The Russians called for a meeting to discuss whether this was an opportunity or a trap. The Colombians increased their own security, uncertain what the silence meant. Smaller crews whispered about moving into abandoned territory, but no one moved. Because a Mafia boss showing restraint was more terrifying than one showing force. Restraint meant calculation. It meant planning. It meant something bigger was coming. and no one wanted to be in the crosshairs when it arrived. Back at the hospital, Hector sat in the same chair he'd occupied for hours, watching his mother sleep. A nurse brought him coffee he didn't drink. A doctor updated him on Catherine's improving condition. His driver texted that reporters were starting to ask questions about the unusual quiet in certain neighborhoods. Hector ignored it all. Around 8 p.m., his phone rang. Not a text this time. A call from a number he recognized but rarely saw. Antonio Vega, one of the old guard. A man who'd been in the game longer than Hector had been alive. A man whose territory Hector had absorbed years ago, but who still commanded respect. Hector answered. Antonio. Hector. The old man's voice was gravelly, tired. I heard what you did, shutting everything down. Word travels fast. In our world, silence travels faster than noise. Antonio paused. Your men are confused. Your competitors are nervous. Your partners are worried. Let them be. Hector, I'm calling as a courtesy. As someone who's been where you are. Whatever you're doing, whatever statement you're trying to make, be careful. Power is like sand. The tighter you grip it, the faster it slips away. I'm not gripping anything, Antonio. I'm letting go. Silence on the other end. Then, that's what I was afraid of. Why afraid? Because a man who lets go of power either finds peace or finds a grave. And in our world, peace is rarer than you think. Hector looked at his mother. Maybe it's worth looking for anyway. Antonio sighed. Your mother? How did you? Because I know you, Hector. And I know what it takes for a man like you to stop the machine. It takes something more valuable than the machine itself. Another pause. How is she? She's going to live. I'm glad. Truly. Antonio's voice softened. But Hector, the people who hurt her, they're watching. They're waiting to see what you do next. If you show mercy, they'll see weakness. If you show nothing, they'll get bold. Either way, you're in a dangerous position. I know. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, you've just painted a target on your back. And the man who pulled the trigger on your mother is probably loading another round right now. Hector's free hand clenched into a fist. Let him. Hector. Let him load it. Let him aim. Let him think he's won. Hector's voice was quiet, cold, absolute. Because when I'm ready, when my mother is safe, when I've decided how this ends, he's going to wish he'd never been born. Antonio was quiet for a long moment. Just don't lose yourself in the revenge, son. That's how good men become monsters. I became a monster 15 years ago, Antonio. I'm just deciding what kind I want to be now. He ended the call and set his phone face down on the table. Catherine stirred in her sleep, her hand reaching out unconsciously. Hector caught it, holding it gently. Outside the hospital window, his city continued without him. Money wasn't being made. Territory wasn't being defended. The empire he'd built was vulnerable, exposed, bleeding, and for the first time in 23 years, Hector Flores didn't care. His mother was alive. Everything else could wait. 3 days after Catherine woke up, Hector finally left the hospital. Not to go home, not to rest, to end this. Victor was waiting in the parking garage with a different car, a nondescript sedan. Nothing that screamed power or wealth. Hector had changed into simple clothes. Dark jeans, a black jacket, no jewelry. He looked like 1,000 other men in the city. Invisible. Did you find him? Hector asked as he slid into the passenger seat. Yeah. Victor pulled out of the garage. He's been holed up in the penthouse downtown. Hasn't left in 2 days. Got 6 guys with him. Armed. He knows. He knows. They drove in silence through midday traffic. The city looked different to Hector now. Not like territory to control or assets to protect. Just a city. Buildings and people and lives that had nothing to do with him. Boss, Victor said carefully. You sure about this? We could bring the whole crew. Make it loud. Send a message to everyone. No. But if Leo's got protection. I said no. Hector stared out the window. This isn't for everyone. This is between him and me. Victor nodded, knowing better than to argue. What do you want me to do? Drop me off 3 blocks away. Wait, if I'm not back in an hour. Don't finish that sentence, Victor interrupted. You'll be back. Hector almost smiled. You sound certain. I've known you 15 years, boss. I've seen you survive things that should have killed you. Whatever happens in there, you'll walk out. And if I don't? Victor's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Then I burn the whole building down with him inside. This time Hector did smile. Grim, but genuine. Good man. The alley behind Leo's building was the same kind Hector had found his mother in. Narrow, dirty, forgotten. The kind of place where the city kept its secrets. Hector had texted Leo 15 minutes earlier. Back entrance. Alone. We talk. Leo had responded immediately. About time. Now Hector stood in the shadows, waiting. The rain had started again, light and cold, soaking through his jacket. He'd left his gun in the car. This conversation didn't need weapons. It needed truth. Footsteps echoed in the alley. Leo appeared from a service door, flanked by 2 of his men. Both armed, both watching Hector with predatory wariness. Leo looked good, confident. Well-dressed in an expensive suit that probably cost more than most people made in a month. His dark hair was styled perfectly. His smile was easy, too easy. Hector. Leo's voice was warm, friendly, like they were meeting for drinks instead of a reckoning. Good to see you, brother. We've been worried. You dropped off the map, shut down everything. People have been asking questions. I know. Is it true? About your mother? Hector didn't answer immediately. He studied Leo's face, looking for something: remorse, fear, guilt, anything human. He found nothing. Yeah, Hector said finally. It's true. Leo shook his head, the picture of concern. Man, I'm sorry. How is she? She's going to live. That's good. That's really good. Leo took a step closer. His men moved with him, hands near their weapons. You know, when I heard what happened, I put out feelers, tried to find out who did it, figured you'd want names. Did you find any? Not yet. But I'm working on it. You know how these things are, people get scared. Don't want to talk. Leo's expression hardened slightly. But we'll find them, and when we do, they'll pay for touching family. Hector was quiet for a long moment, letting the rain fall between them. Then he spoke, his voice soft but cutting. You're a good liar, Leo. I'll give you that. You almost sound like you mean it. Leo's smile faltered. Just for a second. What are you talking about? The security guys at my mother's building. Found them in the river, dead 2 days before she was attacked. Hector, the Cordero brothers. You met with them 3 nights ago at 3 a.m., right around the time you started texting me, asking which warehouse we were meeting at. Leo's face went carefully neutral. His men shifted uncomfortably. You're upset, Leo said slowly. I get it. Your mother got hurt, you're looking for someone to blame. She didn't just get hurt. Hector's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. She was tortured. Professional job, finger-shaped bruises, broken ribs. They wanted her to suffer before they left her for me to find. And you think I don't think, Leo. I know. The alley went silent except for the rain. Leo's easy smile disappeared completely. His hand moved slightly toward his jacket, then stopped when Hector didn't react. You've got no proof, Leo said quietly. I don't need proof. I know. How? Because you're the only one who benefits. The only one who'd be bold enough. The only one who's been whispering in corners about how emotional attachments make me weak. Leo stared at him, calculating. Then, slowly, his expression changed. The mask dropped, the pretense ended, and Hector saw the truth in his eyes. You're right, Leo said simply. I did it. One of Leo's men looked shocked. The other looked nervous. But Leo just stood there, relaxed, like he'd been waiting for this conversation. Why? Hector asked. Because you're soft, Hector. You've gotten soft. Shutting down operations, carrying your mother yourself, showing up at hospitals. Leo shook his head. That's not how kings behave. That's how kings fall. So you tried to kill her? I tried to wake you up. Tried to remind you what this life requires. No weakness. No attachments. No mercy. Leo spread his hands. Instead, you proved my point. You chose her over the Empire. You made yourself vulnerable. She's my mother. She's a liability. Leo's voice hardened. And in our world, liabilities get cut loose. You taught me that, remember? Your words, not mine. Hector stood there, rain soaking through his clothes, and realized Leo was right. He had taught him that. Had lived by that philosophy for years. Had pushed Catherine away because she was a liability, because love was weakness, because power required sacrifice. And Leo had learned the lesson perfectly. You're not wrong, Hector said quietly. Leo looked surprised. What? About what this life requires. About power. About sacrifice. Hector took a step closer. Leo's men tensed, but Leo waved them off. You learned everything I taught you. You saw what I built and decided you could do it better. I can do it better. Maybe you're stronger than me, more ruthless, more willing to do whatever it takes. Hector stopped 3 feet from Leo, close enough to see the ambition burning in his eyes. But you made one mistake. What's that? You touched my mother. The words hung in the rain-soaked air. And what are you going to do about it? Leo asked, his hand moving toward his gun. You came here unarmed, alone. I've got 2 armed men. You think you can? I'm not going to do anything, Hector interrupted. Leo frowned. What? I'm not going to shoot you, not going to beat you, not going to throw you off a building or dump you in the river. Hector's voice was calm, almost gentle. I'm not going to touch you at all. Then why are we here? Hector looked Leo directly in the eyes. Because I wanted you to know that I know. I wanted you to hear 3 words before you disappear. What words? Hector's expression didn't change. His voice didn't rise, but the weight of what he said next crushed everything between them. She was my mother. That was all. No threats, no promises, no detailed descriptions of revenge. Just 3 words that somehow contained more violence than any weapon could deliver. Leo's confidence wavered. That's it? That's all you came to say? That's all. Hector turned and walked away. Wait, Leo called after him. What happens now? What are you going to do? Hector didn't look back. Nothing. Nothing? You're already done, Leo. You just don't know it yet. He walked out of the alley, leaving Leo standing there with his armed men, trying to figure out what just happened. By the time Leo understood, it would be too late, because Hector Flores had just done something more terrifying than any act of violence. He'd shown mercy. And in their world, mercy from a man like Hector meant something far worse than death was coming. It meant erasure. Catherine was released from the hospital on a Tuesday morning. Hector had arranged everything. Not a mansion, not a fortress, just a modest 2-story house in a quiet neighborhood 30 minutes from the city center. Brick exterior, small garden, the kind of place where neighbors waved and kids rode bikes. Normal. He'd bought it under a shell company 3 years ago, never knowing what he'd use it for. Now he knew. Victor drove them there in silence. Catherine sat in the back seat, staring out the window at passing trees and houses. She looked better. The bruises had faded to yellow. The cuts were healing. The pain medications were working. But something in her eyes had changed. She looked older, tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical injury. Where are we going? She asked quietly. Somewhere safe, Hector answered from the passenger seat. Is anywhere safe in your world? He didn't have an answer for that. The house was furnished simply. Nothing extravagant. A comfortable couch, a kitchen table, soft lighting. Hector had made sure there were fresh flowers on the counter, groceries in the refrigerator, blankets on the bed. 4 men he trusted were stationed around the property, invisible but present. It's not much, Hector said as he helped Catherine inside. But it's yours. She walked slowly through the rooms, touching furniture, looking out windows. When she reached the bedroom, she sat on the bed and started crying. Hector froze in the doorway, unsure what to do. Ma? I forgot what this felt like, she whispered through tears. Having a home, being safe, having my son here. Hector crossed the room and sat beside her. She leaned against him, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders the way she used to hold him when he was scared. You're safe now, he said. I promise. For how long? As long as you need. Catherine pulled back to look at him. And what about you? Your empire, your business, doesn't matter. Hicho, you can't just abandon everything you built. Watch me. The first week was the hardest. Hector's phone rang constantly. Messages from crew leaders, demands from partners, threats from competitors sensing weakness. He ignored 90% of them, responding only to Victor with brief instructions. Maintain security, pay the men, hold the territories. Everything else could burn. He spent his days at the house with Catherine, cooking meals he barely knew how to make, watching terrible television shows, helping her walk around the garden as she regained her strength. Simple things, normal things, things he'd never done. One afternoon, he was making soup badly, burning the onions, adding too much salt when Catherine shuffled into the kitchen. You never learned to cook, she observed, smiling slightly. No, you always did it. Because you were too busy running the streets. Hector stopped stirring. Ma, I'm not angry, Hector. I'm just stating facts. She sat at the table. Can I help? You're supposed to be resting. I've been resting for 8 days. I'm going crazy. She gestured to the pot. You're burning that, by the way. He looked down. She was right. Catherine stood slowly and joined him at the stove. Together, they salvaged the soup. She corrected his technique, added proper seasoning, turned something inedible into something that actually smelled good. "There," she said when they finished. "See? Not so hard." They ate together at the kitchen table. No guards, no business, no phones. Just a mother and her son, sharing a meal. "This is nice," Catherine said softly. "Yeah, it is. You could have this, you know. A normal life, if you wanted it." Hector set down his spoon. "Ma, my life isn't normal. Can't be normal. Too much history, too much fear of trying." She looked at him with those knowing eyes. "You think you're trapped in that world. But maybe you just never tried to leave." The words settled between them. By the second week, something shifted. Hector's men noticed it first. He stopped responding to texts about territory disputes. Stopped making decisions about collections. Stopped caring about profits and power plays. He just existed. Every morning, he woke up in the guest room, made coffee, helped Catherine with her physical therapy exercises. They'd take slow walks around the neighborhood. She'd talk about the weather, the neighbors, anything except his past. He'd listen. In the afternoons, they'd sit in the garden. Catherine would read. Hector would just sit, watching birds, feeling sunlight, doing nothing. At night, they'd eat dinner together. Simple conversations. She'd tell stories about his childhood, the good parts, before everything went wrong. He'd laugh at memories he'd buried for years. Then he'd check the security, make sure the guards were alert, and go to bed. It was the quietest his life had ever been. And the strangest part? He didn't hate it. One evening, as they watched the sunset from the porch, Catherine spoke without looking at him. "Your men are worried about you. I know. They don't understand what you're doing. I don't either." She turned to face him. "Then why are you doing it?" Hector was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw. "Because for 23 years, I built something that required me to be a monster. I convinced myself it was necessary, that I was protecting you, protecting myself, building something that mattered." He looked at his mother. "Then I found you bleeding in an alley, and I realized that everything I built meant nothing. None of it protected you. None of it made me happy. None of it was worth what I lost." "And what did you lose?" "You, myself, any chance at being the man you raised me to be." Catherine reached over and took his hand. "You're still that man, Hector. He's just been buried under a lot of bad choices. But he's still there." She squeezed his hand. "I see him every time you make terrible soup, every time you help me walk, every time you choose to be here instead of out there." Hector felt his throat tighten. "I don't know how to be both, Ma. I don't know how to be your son and still be who I am." "Then maybe," Catherine said gently, "it's time to decide who you want to be." The decision came on a Wednesday morning. Hector woke early, made coffee, and sat in the garden as dawn broke. Catherine was still sleeping. The neighborhood was quiet, sprinklers running, birds singing, someone's dog barking in the distance. Peace. He pulled out his phone and made a call. "Victor, boss. Everything okay? I need you to set up meetings. With everyone who matters." "Everyone?" "The Russians, the Colombians, Antonio Vega, the territory managers, everyone." "What's this about?" "I'm walking away." Silence. "Victor, you still there?" "Yeah, I'm here. Boss, you can't be serious." "I've never been more serious. You built this empire from nothing. You can't just—" "I can. And I am." Hector's voice was firm. "Set up the meetings. I'll explain everything then." He ended the call before Victor could argue further. The meetings happened over 3 days. First came the Russians. Dmitri and his brother Alexei, sitting across from Hector in a warehouse office, confused and suspicious. "You're selling?" Dmitri asked, lighting a cigarette. "Transferring. The Eastern Territories. Take them. No charge." Alexei frowned. "What's the catch?" "No catch. Just one condition: you leave my people alone. Anyone who worked for me gets safe passage out or employment with you. Their choice." Dmitri studied him through smoke. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I'm done. Nobody just walks away from this life." "I am." The brothers exchanged glances. Finally, Dmitri nodded. "Okay. We accept. But Hector, if this is some trick..." "It's not." Hector stood, extending his hand. "We had a good arrangement. I'm just making sure it continues without me." They shook hands, still confused but not foolish enough to refuse free territory. The Colombians were harder. Raphael sat across from Hector, arms crossed, face skeptical. You want to sell me your distribution network? Transfer. At cost. I just want out. Why? Personal reasons. Personal reasons don't exist in our business. They do now. Hector slid papers across the table. Everything's documented. Clean transfer. You get the routes, the contacts, the infrastructure. I get out. Raphael didn't touch the papers. You know what people are saying? That you've gone soft. That finding your mother broke you. Maybe it did. That's dangerous, Hector. Weakness gets exploited. I know. That's why I'm getting out before it does. Raphael finally picked up the papers, scanning them. This is legitimate? Completely. And what happens to Leo? Hector's expression didn't change. Leo's no longer relevant. Raphael raised an eyebrow but didn't press. Fine. I'll accept. But Hector, you can't come back from this. Once you're out, you're out. If you change your mind, I won't. Antonio Vega was last. The old man sat in his study, whiskey in hand, listening as Hector explained his plan. You're dismantling everything, Antonio said when Hector finished. Yes, piece by piece. Selling it off, giving it away. Yes, because of your mother. Because I want to live. Antonio sipped his drink slowly. You know what happens to kings who abdicate? They either find peace or they get killed by someone who thinks they're still a threat. I know. Which do you think you'll find? Hector was quiet for a moment. I guess I'll find out. Antonio set down his glass. For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. Not many men in our position have the courage to walk away. Most of us die in this life because we can't imagine any other way to live. Were you ever tempted to walk away? Every day. Antonio smiled sadly. But I never had what you have. Someone worth walking away for. My wife died young. My children wanted nothing to do with me. By the time I realized what I'd lost, it was too late to get it back. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry for me. Be smart for yourself. Antonio stood, extending his hand. Good luck, Hector. I hope you find what you're looking for. They shook hands. What about Leo? Antonio asked as Hector turned to leave. What about him? Word is he's been quiet. Too quiet. Holed up somewhere planning something. He can plan all he wants. You're not worried? Hector paused at the door. Leo wanted my empire. He's about to learn there's nothing left to take. No territories to control. No network to absorb. Just empty buildings and broken connections. He looked back at Antonio. By the time he makes his move, there won't be anything worth moving against. Antonio laughed, a genuine, surprised sound. You're not just walking away. You're burning it all down on your way out. I'm making sure no one else can have what I built, especially not him. That's brilliant. And cruel. I learned from the best. Within 2 weeks, it was done. Hector's empire, built over 23 years, disappeared like smoke. Territories transferred, networks dissolved, partnerships ended, money distributed to his men's severance packages, retirement funds, enough to start over if they wanted. Some took the money and left the life. Others joined the Russians or Colombians. A few retired completely. Victor came to the house on the final day, carrying a briefcase. Last of the accounts, he said, setting it on the kitchen table. Everything's liquidated, distributed, or donated. You're officially out. Hector nodded. What about you? What will you do? I've got enough saved. Might open a bar. Something quiet. Victor smiled. Unless you need me here? I might, if that's okay. Boss, I've been with you 15 years. I'm not going anywhere. They shook hands. After Victor left, Hector sat at the table and realized something profound. For the first time in 23 years, he owned nothing, controlled nothing, commanded nothing. He was nobody. And it felt like freedom. That evening, Catherine found him in the garden. It's done? She asked. It's done. She sat beside him. How do you feel? Lighter, terrified, free. I don't know. That sounds about right. She took his hand. What will you do now? I have no idea. Good. That means you get to figure it out. They sat together as the sun set, mother and son, no empire between them. Just life. The neighborhood woke slowly on Sunday mornings. Hector stood in the kitchen making breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast, coffee that Catherine said was finally drinkable. Through the window, he watched Mr. Chen from next door water his garden. Across the street, the Rodriguez kids were drawing with chalk on their driveway. Normal life, happening all around him. Catherine shuffled in, moving easier now, the physical therapy paying off. She smiled when she saw the table set. Look at you, a proper breakfast. Don't get used to it. I only know how to make 3 things. 3 is more than 0. She sat down with a soft sigh. Did you sleep? Some. You? Better than I have in years. She accepted the coffee he handed her. No nightmares. Good. They ate in comfortable silence. Outside, the world continued. Cars passing, birds chirping, life moving forward without requiring anything from them. It had been 6 weeks since Hector walked away. 6 weeks of learning to exist without power, without fear, without the weight of an empire on his shoulders. 6 weeks of discovering who he was when he wasn't Hector Flores, crime boss. Turned out, he was just Hector, Catherine's son. And that was enough. I need to run to the store, Catherine said, finishing her eggs. We're out of milk. Want to come? You sure you're up for it? Joe, I'm not made of glass. The doctor said walking is good for me. All right, let me grab my jacket. 10 minutes later, they walked down the sidewalk together. No bodyguards, Victor was nearby, always watching, but invisible. No armored cars, no weapons, just a man and his mother, walking to the corner store on a Sunday morning. Mrs. Patterson from 2 houses down waved as she collected her newspaper. Morning, Catherine. Hector. Catherine waved back. Good morning. This was her world now. Neighbors who knew her name, gardens that needed tending, simple routines that gave life shape, and somehow, miraculously, it was becoming his world too. At the store, they browsed the aisles like normal people. Catherine debated between brands of cereal. Hector grabbed milk, bread, coffee. The cashier made small talk about the weather. No one knew who he used to be. No one cared. On the walk back, Catherine spoke quietly. You know what I realized? What? You smile now. Didn't even notice when it started, but you actually smile. Hector thought about it. She was right. Guess I do. It looks good on you. They turned onto their street, and Catherine suddenly stopped walking. What? Hector asked, immediately alert. She pointed ahead. At their house. At the porch. Someone was sitting on their steps. Hector's body tensed, old instincts flooding back. His hand moved to his hip, no gun there anymore. He stepped in front of Catherine protectively. Stay behind me. Hee-ho. Ma, please. They approached slowly. As they got closer, Hector recognized the figure. Leo. He sat on the porch steps, hands visible, no weapon drawn. He looked different, thinner, tired, defeated. His expensive suit was wrinkled. His perfect hair was unkempt. He looked like Hector had felt 6 weeks ago. Lost. What are you doing here? Hector asked, stopping 10 feet away. Leo stood slowly, hands still visible. I'm not here to fight. Then why are you here? Because you won. Leo's voice was flat, empty. I spent 6 weeks trying to take what you built, but there's nothing left to take. You gave it all away. I did. The territories, the networks, the money, all of it. Gone. Leo laughed bitterly. You didn't just walk away. You made sure no one could follow you. That was the point. Leo looked at Catherine, then back at Hector. I don't understand you. You had everything. Power, respect, control. And you just let it go. I chose something more important. Your mother. Leo shook his head. That's what makes you weak. No, Hector said quietly. That's what makes me human. Leo stared at him, trying to understand, failing. Finally, he turned to leave, then stopped. They're all talking about you. Everyone. The Russians, the Colombians, even the small-time dealers. They don't know whether to respect you or think you've lost your mind. Let them wonder. They're calling it the most shocking thing they've ever seen. A king who walked away. Hector glanced at Catherine, who was watching with calm, knowing eyes, then back at Leo. Tell them whatever you want. I don't live in that world anymore. Leo nodded slowly, something like understanding finally crossing his face. You actually did it. You got out. Yeah, I did. How does it feel? Hector thought about scrambled eggs and Sunday walks and neighbors who waved. About making terrible soup and learning to smile. About sitting in gardens with his mother, doing nothing, being nobody. It feels like living, he said. Leo looked at him one last time, then walked away without another word. Catherine moved to Hector's side, taking his arm. You okay? Yeah, I'm okay. They walked up the porch steps together and went inside. That evening, They sat in the garden again, their routine now. The sunset painted everything gold and red. Somewhere in the city, Hector's old world continued without him. Territories changed hands, money changed pockets, power shifted. He didn't care. Catherine squeezed his arm. You shocked them all, mijo. Hector looked at his mother, at the woman who'd worked herself to exhaustion for him, who'd forgiven him when he didn't deserve it, who'd never stopped believing he could be better. What shocked them wasn't that I spared lives, he said quietly. No. What shocked them was that the most feared man in the city chose love over legacy. Catherine smiled, tears in her eyes. And how do you feel about that choice? Hector thought about the man he'd been 6 weeks ago, powerful, feared, alone. Then thought about the man he was now, nobody, ordinary, free. I feel like I finally found what I've been looking for my whole life. And what's that? Home. Catherine leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat together as the sun disappeared and the stars came out. No empire, no throne, no crown. Just a mother and her son, finally together, finally at peace. And for Hector Flores, that was more than enough. It was everything. Thanks for staying with this story right till the final moment. You're the reason these stories come alive. If you're ready for another powerful journey, just tap the next video on your screen. And before you go, leave a quick comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I'm excited to see your thoughts and connect with you down there.